Good morning.
Morning.
Welcome everyone to the Gloucester Unitarian Universalist Church worship service in our beautiful 1806 sanctuary. We're back home again this month, which is a great pleasure for all of us. Whether you're attending our service live here in the sanctuary or watching us on YouTube, whether this is your first or your 50th visit, it's our pleasure to be able to share with you our message of hope for a loving and inclusive world for all people. As a welcoming congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Association, people of all sexual orientations and gender expressions, of all races and nationalities, of all abilities and disabilities are welcome here and in our church community. We have a few announcements this morning. Flowers, cars, and books. Flowers. Since we are back in the sanctuary, we would love it if you'd like to honor someone or simply express yourself with a donation of flowers for the altar. I've had to purloin these from the front desk so that we have something to look at between the candles this morning. Reverend Janet will welcome your contributions. Please call Christine at the church office if you'd like to arrange a date. If you don't know that phone number, email any of us and we'll give it to you. Next Saturday, the Gloucester Meeting House Foundation is hosting a classic car show on the LA, October 2nd from 9 to 2. If you have a classic car you'd like to actually show at the show, registration information is in the weekly email newsletter that arrived on Friday. If you're not receiving the newsletter, please contact Christine in the church office and get yourself on the email list. Books. Our next book club selection is The Night Watchman by Louise Erdrich. It was the winner of the 2021 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, and I've just started reading it and am enjoying it immensely. It's a beautiful story of a Native American family and the dispossession of Native lands and the fight to maintain them in North Dakota. We're meeting on October 20th at 7 p.m. I hope that you can attend. We won't be passing a plate for collection this morning because of COVID germs, but if you feel inspired, and of course we hope you do, there are 2 collection plates on the entry table as you depart or as you enter that you can dump your envelope or your cash into. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our Minister Emeritus, Reverend Wendy Fitting, who is doing our service today.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here. Want to welcome you all. I have a request, and that is that I spent a lot of the lockdown, as many of you probably did, sort of mulling over the state of the world, and it got to be very difficult for me to think of anything specific I could do, because my main concern was the fact that we are in a post-truth era. And that was enshrined, that term, by the Oxford English Dictionary, no less, and was selected as their word, even though it's 2 words, of the year. So that, the fact that that's a real thing, post-truth, makes me crazy. And I was sitting in my house in my pajamas, wondering what I could do about that. I might as well have wondered what I could do about shifting tectonic plates, right? So it got pretty heavy. I had the opportunity to be asked by a Pakistani friend. His name is Nazir. He works at Richdale, which is basically where I buy everything. So I've known him for years, a lovely man. His wife, Samreen, is still in Pakistan, and she lives right on the border with Afghanistan and is in danger. She can't even leave her house. Now, this is a woman with a graduate degree in organizational development. She worked for years for, amazingly, the Eli Lilly drug company in Pakistan. And of course, she can't go to work. So Nazir asked me if I would be a sponsor for his effort to get her to this country. And I don't know anything about immigration or refugee status, but it was a specific thing. It was, it sounded easier than dealing with post-truth, that's for sure. And he asked me, and I said yes. I needed to get out of my head and start to do something. Now, we have a pretty good team. It's pretty small, but we made contact through the good offices of Wendy von Kurter, who has been involved with immigration issues for years. So I got in touch with her and said, tell me what you can about immigration. And she wrote to all of the immigration staff at Seth Moulton's office, Markey's office, and Elizabeth Warren's office. And they got right in touch with me. I guess she told them that I was okay, a good egg. She doesn't know me real well, but she vouched for me, and we have been meeting with them. So that's really good. But there's so many other aspects to this that I want to put a call out to people who are interested in this and have time and can be committed to it. There's so many aspects. There's a money aspect. There's, searching out other advocates, and we're learning as we go. So if you're interested in meeting some really wonderful people and helping out with this effort, which is going to be tough, we might not succeed, but it's worth doing our best. So if you're interested in finding out about that, you can call me, and you can get my number, or write me a text message or an email, and let me know if you're interested. If you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Okay, so the opening words, appropriate, I think, to our post-truth shutdown, lockdown age, are by Annie Dillard. We are here to abet creation and to witness it, to notice each other's beautiful face and complex nature, so that creation need not play to an empty house. And now Pat will do the chalice lighting. Thank you.
In the Unitarian Universalist faith tradition, we begin our services with the ritual of lighting our flaming chalice. If you have a candle prepared at home, please light it with us now. Lucille's going to come forward to light the chalice. Let's take a moment now to affirm the covenant we share with one another in unison. In the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. Life is a gift for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries.
I think this is appropriate to what has separated us from one another. I don't know about you, but I practically lived in my pajamas. Microphone? Oh, microphone, thank you. I ate at the kitchen stove, just sort of your primitive kind of existence. And so I am in need of polishing up my civility skills because I didn't have a lot of time to practice them. Until I got involved with Nazir and his family and had to, be formal in a formal meeting at the congressman's office and the senator's offices. So that's been good for me. So it's another recommendation for getting involved in this exciting, challenging process. So the reading this morning is from Garrison Keillor. There are limits to competence, you know. It's not magical. We just think that it is sometimes. Think we can draw a little circle around ourselves and nothing bad will happen. And we'll have no close calls, but it isn't true. What people in Lake Wobegon didn't say when they were remembering all their close calls with blizzards and the rest of it was that what everybody knows whenever that happens, and that is that each other is the only thing we have in this world that's really important to us. And you know that when you're in big trouble, that we really are devoted to each other. You kind of know it the rest of the time, but it takes real trouble to bring it out in you. And love has brought a good many people to safety when competence was exhausted and could do nothing. I'd like to, Steve, are you up? Okay. And I'd like to say a hello to Steve Lacey, Hamer Lacey's grandson. Good to see you. Started here in, I think it was April of 1989. The pulpit was much higher. There was it seems to be pretty high now, but it was much higher then. And it was hard to tell that there was anybody behind it, you know, so it looked like there was going to be a phantom preacher, if anything. And I was new. And I'm shorter now. I've lost some inches, but you know, what did I think was gonna happen, right? So people told me that when I stood up behind the pulpit, I looked like a piece of toast coming up from a toaster, right? And in a way, I mean, I don't think this is true, but it felt to me that until I proved myself worthy, I wasn't going to get the platform taken away so that I would seem a little taller. So my friend Jill, and it was, you know, it was like this little head, this little piece of toast coming up. And so my friend Jill made a substantial wooden box and painted it pink, and I kept it under the lumpy couch that used to be here. And I'd drag it out and stand on it, and, I looked like I had some stature at least. This is, there's so many great stories from all those years, and I'm sure you've added to them, of church life and personalities. And, I'm very happy to see so many of you here because we are all inheritors of a great Universalist faith. And I'm really more of a Universalist than I am a Unitarian. I could go on and on about that, but I won't. This is a story about seizing an opportunity that was very unusual for me. And I come to believe that this is the way the action of grace works, that all of a sudden you're faced with a challenge, usually, and it's your decision, my decision, whether to go that unroad taken, whatever it is, the different road, right, the unusual road, or just continue plodding along in a safe sort of highway of life. So this is called intercessory prayer. The church I was raised in, the Unitarian Church, was in a state of upheaval when I was a teenager. This is in the 60s. In the mid-60s, it was rocked by debate about the war in Vietnam, about war in general, and by the often violent opposition to the movement for civil rights. And many of the congregants, this is in New Jersey, were directly involved in being partners to folks, demonstrating and fighting for rights. A lot of the arguments centered on what was the right response from our religion, which led to even more vituperative debate about what Unitarian Universalists believe. It seemed as if suddenly our lack of a creed, which was an intentional tenet borne out over almost 200 years in the so-called debate about the Liberty Clause. A lot of people talked about this for years. The heart of it is, each of us has the liberty to explore our beliefs on our own, to express them in our own ways, and not have to be locked into a creed. And so it's the cornerstone of the freedom in both Unitarianism and Universalism. But it had become a stumbling block, and I think often still is. Because in perilous times, and I'm not arguing for a creed, what I want to emphasize is increased awareness of what, the sort of central, what the central beliefs are, affirmations, okay? The purposes and principles, okay? A real good study of those. And, we don't sort of go off inventing stuff, which happens all the time, of what Unitarians believe. I was in a Take Back the Night march many years ago, and a guy who was active in the Rockport church, a friend, asked me if I had email. And I almost wanted to say, what's email? But, because it was new. And I said, no. And he said, that's not very Unitarian of you. Now, how that's Unitarian, in his mind, you can say, it's not Unitarian to go to the beach, or to read columns by David Brooks, okay? So we tend to attach, creeds, in a sense, to stuff that is hardly creedal, much less true. So we need something to cling to for safety, facing the loss of a loved one, our own illnesses, serious illnesses, huge challenges that come into every life, going through a divorce, or, you know what these things are. And in those times, I think it's hard to pray to whom it may concern, kind of thing, with any and every or no idea what that means, okay? You need something you can grab onto. Just, it's a comfort in times like that. Something which will buoy us in the flood. In perilous times, even those who have economic stability and relative comfort will want in extremis the arms of a muscular faith. Now, this is a quotation. This is by James Wood from his book, Serious Noticing. And he writes, if intelligent people could talk themselves, think themselves into happiness, intellectuals would be the happiest people on earth. It's good to bear in mind, because we have that kind of, one of the challenges that I think Unitarian Universalists have is that and this was true in my church, we have this sort of idolatry of intellect, It was a challenge for me, deciding to go to divinity school, which had been a lifelong dream, and, rooted in my background as a teenager in the Unitarian Church. So when I was a junior in high school, this is what I wanted to do. I fell in love with Ralph Waldo Emerson, loved the Transcendentalists, and I took a long, winding road back to it, so that when I graduated, I was 40 years old, and when I was ordained, same year. So I'm glad that I had some living in me before I actually pursued it. Where was I going? Oh, yes, and the thing and I worried about this, because my experience in the Unitarian Church in New Jersey was this kind of lively repartee between people and from the minister, who was a great minister. But it was this sort of, almost this intellectual game where, people, not exactly name drop, but you could get into a discussion, for instance, about communism, right? And that you'd be quoting different experts and authors and things you heard on public radio and stuff like that. And that was kind of the basis of interaction. So it was a lot of work, but it was very lively. But the kind of faith that we need in times like Garrison Keillor describes, blizzards. One of the things that happened to him was he took his kids to the circus, and the main attraction, elephant, Majumbo, something like that, got its trunk into a window that was cracked, and all his kids were sitting in the back seat eating peanuts. And so the elephant's trunk, sort of slipped into, the slightly open window and started raiding their peanuts, which the kids loved. But it was a small car, and it started to, kind of go up and down. So it's, blizzards are bad enough, but having an elephant in your car is pretty challenging, I think. But a faith that is creedal, for instance, was ridiculed in my church of my childhood. It was ridiculed as being needed by those who lacked the rational capacity and discipline to rely on themselves. Self-reliance in this religion, particularly Unitarianism, goes way deep, okay? We're smart people, and we can rely on ourselves even in tough times. Well, I'm 72 years old, and I can tell you that's not true. I need the people around me increasingly, and I'm glad I found out I found that out a long time ago, really pretty much in this church, where there really was a connectivity and a reciprocity among the church members that meant you could rely on a church member if you were in trouble. I mean, there was a real kind of open-heartedness. And I also attribute that to Universalism. I'm not going to trash the Unitarians, but given my upbringing, I had some real questions, because it wasn't fun. I mean, the youth group was great. Let me tell you, it was LRY, and it was pretty wild. And, you know, let the adults, I mean, they were experimenting with LSD, I mean, it was that crazy, those crazy years. So, you know, let them frolic as they would. And the kids were sort of free to, you know, explore and frolic and go to, you know, conferences that were really wonderful and pretty wild. And I survived them. Oops, dropped the hymnal. Could somebody pick it up for me? No, just kidding. I can do that. Okay, still do that. So, hence, in church school and in going to church and, you know, listening to sermons and you know, being aware of this sort of wonderful, in a way, atmosphere of debate and challenge and intellectual flights of intellect and a certain amount of name dropping, a huge emphasis on world religions. But in terms of Christianity, the message I got was that it was for weak-minded people. That was really the message I got, and not for smart people like us. An irony that has dawned on me over the years is that in my wonderful religious instruction as a Unitarian child, though I was taught and learned to admire and respect the religions of the world, there was a distance in it. These ancient and rich religious traditions of the East, in particular, were worthy of our pretty much academic interest. There was, you know, it was a very kind of academic flavor kind of atmosphere in the church. But weren't these traditions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Sufism, Islam, Jainism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism, we learned about that too, weren't all of these characterized by mystical elements? Reaching out beyond what reason alone could offer for fulfillment, enlightenment, and comfort. It's sort of the basis of all of these is a kind of reaching out and appreciating a kind of sense of mysticism that each of these traditions expressed in various ways. Very, very kind of wonderful invitation to explore and what was beyond our rational mind, but was very compelling to what was mystical in us. So that I doubt whether a Buddhist, especially a white Western middle-class Buddhist, would have gained much ground in our congregation with assurances, with his or her assurances that disciplined meditation could stop the war. That wouldn't have flown, I don't think. But we learned about them. We have a problem, I think. We have a tendency, which I call the tyranny of hidden creeds. And it's sort of like my friend who thought that having email was a central belief or something of Unitarianism, okay? So a lot of times we'll hear that kind of thing, that this is a Unitarian, this is a Universalist Unitarian thing. And all kinds of stuff show up. We say we welcome everybody, everybody's welcome, and I think we're better at that. And I think this congregation has been wonderful about that. In other congregations, or these are real instances, somebody comes in for the first time, is greeted at the door and shown to a pew, and asks the greeter, you know, I don't see the Lord's Prayer in your order of service. And oh my God, you know, oh, we don't believe in that. Or it could be anything, okay? We don't believe that. So on the one hand, you have this wonderful, open-hearted welcome. And then people come in, probably with no understanding of the history of a Unitarian Universalism, and find out that there's this whole kind of hidden creed that isn't written down anywhere. I mean, it's not written down anywhere that email is essential to our faith. So various things come in, and people have opinions about what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. And I think that because we have this liberty clause, because we are not a creedal religion, it means we have to understand and study both of them, Universalism and Unitarianism, much more deeply, and have conversations among ourselves. There was an incident in the Rockport UU, Unitarian Universalist Church, I don't like UU, Unitarian Universalist Church, where one of the kids in the church school was waving around a rubber, not a rubber, a rubber sword, right? A flexible thing. And it wasn't his mother, but another person in the church grabbed the thing away from him and said, "We don't do that here." It's probably, you know, not a great idea to let kids play with, you know, even fake weapons, but it alienated the kid and his parents from the church, because out of the blue comes this demand, this scolding, and we have a tendency to scold each other. I didn't write a sermon to bash Unitarian Universalism, but I've had a long time to think about the pitfalls, okay, that that don't serve us well. So the other thing, and this probably happens in all kinds of religions, the scolding, you know, if you're suspected, and this was, the hotbed of this was Harvard Divinity School. I mean, you know, it was like, well, I refer to it as the Hitler Youth, okay? There were students who, it almost felt like were hiding in stairwells and listening to see if you said the wrong thing. For instance, I knew what PWA means. I don't know if you do, but no test, nope. And it was right after a big march on Washington. I had gone to an early one, you know, a gay pride march. And this was a big second one, and there were people with AIDS, PWAs, at the head of the march, some in wheelchairs. And it was an affirmation, huge affirmation of their worth among a whole ton of allies, all right? So it was a really good thing. So the person, the divinity school student who was talking about it, kept talking about PWAs. And I probably could have guessed, but I said, what's PWA? And you might have thought that I, you know, said, I love Satan, right? I mean, she was aghast. It was like somehow, you know, I was an enemy all of a sudden, because I didn't know the coded language. Coded language among us can be very off-putting, and you can get scolded. The other side of that, which is very interesting, is that in kind of rarefied committees, you know, at headquarters, or you know, where people are contributing, you know, really great stuff to something that's going on, there's a hyper-awareness about sort of political correctness. You know, what's the wrong thing to say, and I didn't realize, I mean, I've been in those situations where, you know, people just seem to be looming and ready to pounce like this student on if you were saying the wrong thing, which made me feel like saying the wrong thing, just to cause trouble. And I was really focused here. I did some stuff for the association, but I needed to be here in Gloucester because we were struggling and we needed to build the church. Plus the atmosphere in these committees, for instance, was, and I didn't know this description for many years, but Unitarian Universalists are known to be pre-offended. In other words, you go in already with a chip on your shoulder, right? Waiting to pounce, okay? Assuming that somebody's going to say some offensive thing. And offensive could be not knowing what PWA means. I mean, is that offensive? I don't think so. So anyway, all this leaping on each other it doesn't bode well for attracting new members, okay? And I think it's the kind of thing that takes minutes, hours, weeks, even years off your life for no good reason. Because the level of tension and anxiety, because it could happen to you. You could be scolding one person and somebody else starts scolding you. It's like it's not a way to be happy, not at all. So, where was I? Okay. So this tyranny of hidden creeds really requires a close study and civility in people, getting together to discuss what these things mean. Now, a good friend of mine who was a long-term Unitarian, said one time that instead of hiring conflict consultants, that we should actually just hire Miss Manners. I think that we need, and it would be cheaper. You could have a reading group of Miss Manners and really probably achieve a whole lot more patience and civility and respect for each other than hiring, a very expensive conflict resolution expert. Okay, so I'm an advocate for that. This church, in my experience, has weathered a lot of challenges very, very well. People here, my experience, and again, I think it's our basis in universalism, are kind to each other. We've had some major conflicts. It didn't derail the church. It didn't derail me. I had some sanctions put on me for doing something that I would do again that was tough. And it was very upsetting to the church because the whole issue was very upsetting. So we survived that. And, nobody was in a state of high dudgeon, right? We approached it calmly and seriously and well. And we lived through some tough times, and I think are stronger because of that, because we knew how to get through them. We knew how to listen to each other with civility. So if you were devoted to prayer, for instance, if you said, that you pray, in my old church, that would have been, just considered ridiculous, poo-pooed, and the last resort of the weak-minded. So I'm just going to skip to, because I could go on and on, to an experience of grace, really, that happened to me at Boston City Hospital. I encountered a ministry student, a young guy, at Divinity School who, was pounding the table about, I don't believe in intercessory prayer. Now, intercessory prayer, is when you ask God for something, okay? Not a new car, but for instance, in AIDS healing service, which we had the first one here on Cape Ann years ago, you they're clergy and other folks in groups of 2 or 3 at various places in the sanctuary here, offering to, if you want to come forward, pray with you, just in a very intimate way. And put their hands on you, if it was okay, on your head as a comforting gesture. And the first ones I went to were in Jamaica Plain, and there were African American ministers among the prayer people. And it was, the person would say, I ask God for peace and comfort, ask God for skilled drug companies and doctors and, research. Ed Hunt, who was a dear member here of blessed memory, came up to one group that I was in and said, I'm worried about Africa. Now, this was years and years ago. So all kinds of requests, sometimes just silent prayer. But the African American ministers that I prayed with in Jamaica Plain, for instance, would yell at God. They would say, Jesus, we want you to listen to this person. This person is trying to reach you. Will you please show up? I thought, whoa, wow, that's powerful. So this is a little story about that. That was intercessory prayer. So the following story is about Pat and how I prayed on my knees. Did I skip something here? No, okay. In my chaplaincy training, I got to know people who were often admitted and readmitted with chronic conditions. Now, this was like 86, I think 1986, a million years ago. And there were a lot of people who came in on a regular basis who were HIV positive. And that was happening a lot here in Gloucester. There was a lot of that happening. Much of it was among IV drug users. And we had a support group for people here in the church with their families if they wanted. And we respected their privacy. And I think it was a help. So Pat was there with recurrent pancreatitis and other issues. And once when I visited her, she was desperate, really desperate for a cigarette. In those days, the patients at Boston City could smoke in a lounge on the ward, at the end of the ward. The problem was that Pat was attached to a couple of medication drips and a tube in her chest that was connected to a breathing machine that was anchored to the foot of her bed, okay? She wanted to go down to the lounge and have a smoke, but she was pretty much, if you have a tube in your chest, you're probably not real ambulatory right then. So she wasn't going anywhere unless she ripped out the tube, the drip lines, and which was exactly what she wanted to do. She was grabbing at that stuff. She was grabbing at the tube in her chest. And I had reached the limits of my power and my training. This was on-the-job training. This was a crisis because she really was intent on this. I had reasoned, cajoled, and begged Pat, please don't do, no, you don't need that. You don't need to do that. It's bad for you, blah, blah, all this rational stuff. And there were no more options in my beleaguered head. And it was happening so fast that it would have been impossible to alert the nurses' station to come quick and help me out with this desperate person intent on having a cigarette. So the longing, all right, sort of like the longing for something beyond us is something I believe in. The longing itself is a great thing. It's not like, you're on a path and you have to get there quickly, because it's hard to tell. It changes. What are you longing for? So just an acknowledgement that we have a longing, I think, for the kind of mysticism, nurturing kind of mysticism and imagination that is really, I think, important for having a happy, balanced life. Now, it doesn't mean that you believe in God. It doesn't believe that you're going to yell at Jesus. It's just connecting to whatever is pulling at us, whatever is luring us in a way toward something beyond ourselves. And that's the best I can do with it, because we don't have a creed, right? And so if, it wouldn't be right to say the longing is toward a God who looks like Santa Claus. I'm sorry, it's just not us. That much I can affirm. So the longing put the words in my mouth. More accurately, longing's burly cousin, desperation, put the words in my mouth. I muckled a hold of skinny, frantic Pat, and together we went down on our knees. And I said, Jesus, we need you here right now. That's intercessory prayer. I didn't stop to think, is this something that I believe as a Unitarian Universalist? No, it was desperation. And that desperation, to me, was the action of grace. It was like, Wendy, you've got this unusual choice. It's not something you're used to, yelling at God, demanding something of Jesus. But, not doing it is crazy. It's not an option. She's going to pull that tube out of her chest. So we went down, and I had a hold of her. And it occurred to me that in her life as an African-American woman, probably, grew up in African-American neighborhoods in Boston, and probably had experience with the kind of spirit, right, in the Black church, which, was, I thought, probably part of her history that, maybe she didn't think about much anymore, but she would recognize the rhythm of these words, the force of these words, in the name of Jesus. So I was counting on that being a comfort to her. But there wasn't any miracle. I didn't think there'd be a miracle. All I wanted to do was keep her from pulling the tube out of her chest. Pat did not rise up from the floor and say, I've been delivered of my obsessions with alcohol and cigarettes and every other bad thing. No, she didn't do that. You didn't have an outcome in mind. You just had to do the desperate thing, and hopefully she wouldn't pull the tube out of her chest. Simply, the moment passed, and for that little while, and I stayed with her, she was back up in the bed, I was back up on my feet, she was calm. She had calmed down enough, and for me to summon help and make sure that she'd be safe. She's probably dead by now, this woman. She was very ill with lots of things. This was, probably more than 30 years ago at Boston City Hospital. And she was very sick from alcohol and drugs and HIV and, just poverty. So she didn't live long after that. But she gave me, and this is like one of the unsuspected teachers that Wendell Berry writes about, a person who you would least, in my church as a kid, if you were a professor, right? A tenured professor, some sort of expert, a poet. I mean, those were your bona fides. And those were the ones we recognized. That you had some cred, you were a big shot. Well, Pat was not a big shot by any means. Not in the usuals, not in the sense in which I grew up, okay? She didn't have a degree or anything. She was a human being. And she gave me the authenticity of the longing in her desperation, in my desperation, taking the untrod road of praying out loud and demanding that Jesus do something. That was different for me. And the longing started really to have kind of metaphorical muscles and bones. It was affirmed that, to me, that if I were presented, and I think we're all presented just out of the blue, right? But by a path less traveled, maybe, not always a beautiful sunset, that can inspire you, but grace is often rough, as it was here. And it's up to us to decide to go that hard way, and sometimes you're pushed to it, like I was. It was the only thing I could do that would have any impact, I hoped. But it was very, very unusual for me. Not anymore. Depends on the circumstances, but, I'm not afraid of this kind of prayer. I don't believe that it's against our religion. It's one of those imaginary things that people say, oh, that's not Unitarian, email. It's not very Unitarian of you not to have email. Now, this is bedrock stuff, I think. She gave me the authenticity. This person who would be considered worthless, right, in society today, was actually kind of propelled me to take an unusual step. She helped Grace offer me a possibility of doing something wild that was extremely helpful and has stayed with me. And it's already 11 o'clock. I was hoping to let you go by 10:30, but I haven't been up here in ages, so I'll stop. I'll stop. So now, Steve, do you have time to do? Okay, great. All right, so we'll have some music. I'm really dedicating this really joyful benediction to Jen, is back home recuperating from a stroke out on the West Coast, and he's safe home now. Let's see, where is it? Oh, here we go. It's from Isaiah. It's number 708, if you want to look at it in your hymnal. For you shall go out in joy and be led back in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall burst into song, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Amen. I guess if he was going to leave, if there wasn't time for a postlude, he had to go. So go in peace. I guess that's it. And, we have to extinguish the, is that done? Okay. Yes. Is there a reading for that, Pat? Extinguishing? Okay. So let there be no more light in the chalice.
Say the words to extinguish.
You want to take over to tell me what's coming up?
We're going to extinguish the chalice.
Huh?
We'll extinguish the chalice.
Okay.
And flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of unity, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you, Lucy.
Amen. Great.
Outside, we'll be gathering on the LA.